Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, Surrey South MLA Elenore Sturko is now a BC Conservative, and she's faced many questions over what this means about her advocacy and what it means for the SOGI school program. We'll hear from a Surrey teacher, and we'll ask you, what is the future of 2S LGBTQ plus education? In half an hour, crows. They're frightening, but also endlessly fascinating. Have you had a recent crow encounter yourself? What have you always wanted to know about crow behavior? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and CBC Television. We're live streaming too on the CBC News app or on YouTube. Just search for CBC Vancouver. You can call us now on our top story. After her defection to the BC Conservatives, MLA Elenore Sturko says the province's sexual orientation and gender identity policy, or SOGI, must be reconsidered. We're asking you, what is the future of 2S LGBTQ plus education in BC schools? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, Sturko's comments yesterday mark an apparent change from her earlier stance. She once tweeted demanding an apology from John Rustad, the BC Conservative leader, for calling homosexuality a lifestyle. And much has been made of a standing ovation Sturko gave Premier David Eby when he criticized the BC Conservative stance on SOGI. Let's take you back to that moment last October. Here was John Rustad.
Thousands of British Columbians, many of them from minority communities, have been protesting against SOGI 123, which was originally introduced by the BC United Liberals. Parents are concerned about the sexualization of their children in this NDP government's education system. Will the minister admit that SOGI 123 has been divisive, an assault on parents' rights, and a distraction on student education?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I welcome the member to the House as the leader of his new party. But I got to say, this is not an auspicious start. You know, when you talk about the issues of the day for British Columbians, cost of living, housing, we heard from the BCUP, healthcare, addiction, mental health. To come into this place, to use the authority of his office, his new party, to find a small group of kids in our province, to leverage all of that to make them feel less safe at school, less safe in our community, to feed the fires of division in our province and bring culture war to British Columbia, it is not welcome. And when he sat on this side of the House, he supported those same policies, Honourable Chair. It is outrageous that he would stand here and do this. He sees political advantage in picking on kids and families and teachers and schools who are just trying to do their best for kids who are at risk of suicide, Honourable Chair. Shame on him. Choose another question.
Thank you, members.
Now, what you heard there was applause and a standing ovation that lasted 32 seconds. And off camera, Elenore Sturko was on her feet to support the Premier, even though she was a BC United MLA at the time. Well, that was 8 months ago, and let's fast forward to yesterday. Here's what Sturko said, now as an MLA for the BC Conservatives, in response to a question about John Rustad's position against SOGI.
Yes, there are legally enshrined rights, and me and John are aligned that we will be respecting legally enshrined rights. But when you have a program where either it's misinformation or real or perceived, or even the acknowledged issues with some of the materials, how do we build back the trust of parents? How do we move forward in a way that finally puts the division to bed, and creating something new? Still wanting to make schools a safe and welcoming place for everyone, but finding an opportunity to create something new for our school system that respects legally enshrined rights and rebuilds the trust and finally puts this division to bed, I think is a wonderful thing to do.
That is Elenore Sturko speaking yesterday. So what do you think? We are asking you on the open line. What do you think is the future of 2S LGBTQ plus education in BC schools? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 or email us bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Annie Ohana. She is the Indigenous Department Head at LA Matheson Secondary School in Surrey. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk about SOGI first of all and kind of get that established. It is not a curriculum. SOGI 123 is a resource endorsed by the Provincial Education Ministry. What is it exactly? How would you describe it?
Yeah, correct. And I would also add that it's not a program. So the very semantics and the language that Rustad, Sturko, and others are using are actually incorrect. So what SOGI is very simply resources that help teachers in terms of age-appropriate materials, ways that are more inclusive, kind of changing what we see in our schools, which for a long time criminalized queerness. We can also add to the fact that we had very racist materials, very Eurocentric materials, and it allows us to build a more inclusive and diverse opportunity and space so that all students feel represented in their classrooms, and also that teachers and staff and families feel represented by the materials, by what they're being taught in school.
You said age appropriate, and I suppose that's where the opposition might come in. That's some of the criticism we've heard from the BC Conservatives, whether it's age appropriate. Is it?
It absolutely is, but let's be very nuanced about this. If you have a kindergartner that is learning from a book that talks about different families, there is no, I wanted to say this quite outright, there is no pornography, right? In grade 12, when we speak about the gay purge, or in a math class.
My apologies, Annie. I really want to be able to hear what you have to say. We unfortunately have a pretty unclear connection with you. I would really like to be able to hear clearly what you have to say. We're going to fix that connection with Annie Ohana, a teacher at LA Matheson Secondary School in Surrey, and she is our guest this afternoon, as she is joining us as well, and asking you what do you think is the future of 2S LGBTQ plus education in BC schools? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Annie Ohana is my guest, the Indigenous Department Head at LA Matheson Secondary in Surrey. We'll go back to her once that connection is fixed. Right now, Kayenta is on the line, and this is Kayenta Martin, the chair of the District Parent Advisory Council in Vancouver. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Kayenta. Thanks so much for calling in. What did you want to say about SOGI and education in schools around the 2S LGBTQ plus community?
I really appreciate that you're covering this today. It's an incredibly important topic to address the fact that our education system needs to be representative of our culture and our population. We include information and education on people of different religious backgrounds, people of different racial and cultural backgrounds, and we need to include people with the SOGI education as well.
There has been opposition to SOGI, and even apart from the latest in BC political news, would that include diverse opinions on the LGBTQ plus community?
I think having an opinion against something doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be taught in school. There are people in our society who have opinions that believe that one race is more important or more superior than another. And we don't treat that as fact in our school. So we shouldn't be doing that with gender diversity or gender orientation or sexual orientation, sorry. I think we need to educate ourselves. I think parents and those who are opposed to this education, I would really encourage them to educate themselves on what is actually being covered in classes and in schools. As Annie said, it is very age appropriate. We hire our teachers because they are knowledgeable about how to teach our children, and we need to trust them.
And Kayenta, have you heard, just at the DPAC, have you heard from parents, genuinely ask you questions or raise concerns with you about SOGI?
So just coming to us on their own questions about SOGI, no. We did have a parent education opportunity a couple weeks ago in our May general meeting where we had a speaker talk about SOGI. And we did have a few parents that attended that had real concerns about SOGI. And we took those questions and addressed them and answered them. It's about education and it's about having those conversations. So
what was that conversation like? What was that conversation like?
There were people that were bringing forward information that they had heard about the CAS report and other...
what is that? Pardon me. I'm sorry.
It's a report. No, that's okay. It's a report, from what I understand. I'm not an expert on it, but from what I understand, I believe it's from Britain, and it is supposedly promoting or providing information on detransitioning and how prevalent that is. However, it has been disqualified as a reputable source of information, and our speaker really took the time to provide us with correct, factual information and talk about concerns parents have about detransitioning. And Misha Oak was an incredible presenter, and I would really encourage people to engage in conversation.
Okay. And information about transgender youth. Kayenta, good to hear from you as a Vancouver parent and chair of the DPAC in Vancouver. Thanks so much for calling.
Thank you for having this program. Take care.
That is Kayenta Martin, in fact, the chair of the Vancouver DPAC. And I think we do have Annie Ohana back on the line. Hi there, Annie. My apologies for that.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that's okay.
So you were describing to us the age appropriateness of SOGI materials in your view. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So as what we're trying to say basically is that we follow the BC Human Rights Code. And so we want to see reflected in our materials that all protected characteristics are not discriminated against, that we speak about the history, about the culture, about the celebratory pieces, and the truth of what has occurred over, kind of our history. So whether that's sharing a very simple book at the kindergarten level, whether in my social justice class we speak about the history of the gay purge and how Canada criminalized homosexuality and fired thousands of people from their jobs on the suspicion of being gay. So it depends on the grade level, and at no point in time are we exposing kids to dangerous information, because this word keeps coming up, to pornography, to any sense of something that parents would object to or even students would object to, quite honestly. We are simply, just as we speak about Black history in Canada, about Indigenous history, anything you can think of, right? We want examples that see different body types and different abilities. That's exactly what SOGI is meant to do.
Okay, and I'm just going to, state that this part of the conversation may not be appropriate for younger audiences. Annie, you mentioned there pornography. It comes up in this debate, and it was mentioned again. A claim made by the BC Conservative leader this morning on an interview. I have reached out to ask for evidence of that, but I haven't heard back. But why do you think that keeps coming up then? Is there material that perhaps may be too sexually mature that can be interpreted in that way?
Well, the fact is that I've been under attack as part of this kind of reality. And what I can see is that the materials they're presenting are around maybe one or two books. and I want to say this as clearly as I can, these are not books that are part of our curriculum. They are not part of something that a teacher would pick up and open to like the 2 pages that they keep handing out and putting on posters, right? And this happened in Surrey, large-scale posters printed and putting, where in high traffic areas. Now, is this book available in every single public library in Canada and America, probably around the world? In terms of wherever that would be allowed? Yes. Absolutely. But again, that's a choice. That's freedom of expression in terms of, and librarians, to be clear, do vet, materials, right? It's something that we take the time, or I'm not a librarian, but librarians take the time to think about the materials that are available. But that student can also go to Surrey Central Library or Burnaby Public Library to pick up that material. Again, I want to make it clear, though, that in no way, shape, or form does sex ed include pornography. In no way, shape, or form, if I'm talking about, the history of World War II and the breaking of the Enigma Code, and that person happened to be gay, that somehow that is inappropriate.
Something that Elenore Sturko brought up, just to bring it back to the political developments, she brought up yesterday in terms of her comments around we need to review SOGI because it has become so divisive, and how do you regain the trust of parents? Do you see that, perhaps someone like her who has been an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community, do you see a way forward that does somehow review or replace SOGI that would diffuse the kind of opposition that you're seeing, to diffuse, the polarized debate that we're seeing around it?
Yes, and we already do that. We do it every day. And I feel quite offended that multiple people, and perhaps Elenore, in terms of the latest comments, do not see the work of teachers during professional development, during district processes, which allow for challenging of material, which, we review materials. There's a vetting process provincially, every district has their own protocols, that this is done on the daily, that teachers talk to parents on the daily. I also feel offended on behalf of families that, for the most part, have always had dialogue and conversation with teachers and their schools. And I feel that there's a little bit of racism there when we're suggesting that, quote, and this is Rustad, minority communities, right? Minority parents. When I don't see that. I teach in a BIPOC school in a BIPOC area. Most of us are BIPOC. And what we see is support, because we're elevating identities. We're elevating the fight for human rights for all of our families. And when students can come home and say, I saw myself, right? We celebrated, right? We talked about my history, my culture, my identity. It's a beautiful thing. So I feel like we're falling prey to a lot of misinformation and to a lot of kind of discriminatory beliefs, meanwhile ignoring the actual BC provincial curriculum, which is not political, right? I don't care who the governing party is. Those processes in the Ministry of Education should never be political. It's something that we look at expertise and professional advice, and teachers being very much experts because we have multiple degrees in these areas. So I do find there's a lot of missing information here that suggests that we don't review the materials that we use. My
guest is Annie Ohana, Indigenous Department Head at LA Matheson Secondary School in Surrey, asking you, what is the future of 2S LGBTQ plus education in BC schools? And TA is on the line from Aldergrove. Hi, TA, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon, Mrs. Elliott. Thank you for having me on your program.
Sure.
I just wanted to say real briefly about the SOGI policy that's supposedly being considered. I think just let it go. 0 on there, let it die for a while, and see where this goes. And the reason why I'm saying that is, please, on there, I'm a retired school bus driver, and I used to deal with lots of kids, 1 through K through 12. And most of my trouble students I had problems with on this and everything else was bullying or picking on, doing what they were doing, let's say going into the areas that they shouldn't have, but, somebody turning into or changing their lifestyles or whatever.
You're using some terminology I don't quite understand. So you're saying you've seen a lot of bullying on the buses when you used to drive the buses, TA?
That is correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so what do you think of you were saying we should just let it go. What do you mean by let it go?
what I mean is just let it go for now and see where this trial base is going to go with this SOGI policy. If it does have to be voted on by the people or by the parties.
Okay.
And what I mean by that also too is there's a little phrase I came up with that I said to some of the students on my bus in the beginning of the year. I says, what do you think ALS stands for, everybody? And I said, it's not a medical term. Alternative lifestyle. You guys got to realize now that we're in a multicultural area. Everything is changing so darn quick that you've got to be accepted with this. If somebody's going to be different, big deal. Let it go.
Okay.
Because, this person's probably dealing with a lot of pressure, what they've seen in the media, what they're dealing with in the books or, on everything. And they don't need me peer pressures there.
Okay.
Support on there.
I'm going to take the bottom line of your point, which is everybody getting along and not bullying others for being different. I'm going to take that part of what I took from your point, Tia. Thank you very much. I'm going to
respond?
Pardon me. Yes, go ahead, Annie. I was just going to say that.
Yeah, very quickly. I thank him for saying what he said. Number one, these are not lifestyles. Right. And for anybody who is queer, I think we would reject that motion. Right. That this is a lifestyle. It is not. Secondly, that I have to say that we have done the research. SOGI is not new or whatever. Any type of diversity or inclusive practice is not new. And in fact, what we've seen through the research, scientifically peer reviewed, is that the introduction of GSAs and other just forms of more inclusive practices.
Gay straight alliances.
Has reduced bullying, has reduced mental health issues, has reduced suicidal ideations. But what I can tell you right now is that as the anti-SOGI movement has really picked up steam, we are seeing open misgendering of students by staff, by students. We are seeing bullying rising through the roof. We have parents protesting and bullying kids because kids come back in our buildings and say, I feel bullied. Right? They are speaking about me as if I'm a monster. So I have to put out there that I don't disagree on everything he said, but in fact, we are seeing that SOGI is under attack, that is leading to violence towards our students.
It's a conversation that's certainly on the minds of people today. Annie Ohana, I know you're very busy. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Annie Ohana is the Indigenous Department Head at L.A. Matheson Secondary School in Surrey. It's 12:28 now Pacific Time. This is BC Today. And we've gotten a lot of emails from you on this topic, in fact, and we talked about it yesterday on the program as well, and some emails now from you on this. Wilbur writes from Kelowna, here are my thoughts about this as a gay queer man in BC, in joining a party with a platform that clearly has the intent to undermine the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, and having previously spoken out against that, Sturko seems to be a political opportunist who isn't concerned with integrity. Not only is she throwing her own community under the bus, she will be used as a token spokesperson to justify undermining human rights. Roman writes from Port Alberni, I wonder, should we look at this granularly, or is it more important to try and understand what the overall movement is within our provincial politics? For instance, are we seeing the shift to the populist means of leadership, which appears to be a move governed by fear-based projectionism and a two-party hate fest rather than a healthy multi-party race with diverse platforms and representative entities? And Lucinda in Maple Ridge writes, Sturko has agreed to shorten her political career by joining the party of anti-vaxxers and bigots, in particular anti-LGBTQ+. They will not succeed in defeating the NDP. And the BC Liberals or United will have to do more than change their name. Thanks very much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca. Much more coverage of BC politics and all the changes around it, the defection of two MLAs just in recent days to the BC Conservatives. Lots more coverage on that story coming up throughout the day here on CBC. Stay tuned for more. Coming up in our second half hour of the program, we're going to take your calls on something that a lot of people may have experienced in recent days and recent weeks, and that is an encounter with crows. I want to hear your stories and your questions as well, because they are fascinating creatures. What are your questions about crow behavior? That's coming up in our second half hour. Right now, here's a CBC News update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The Privacy Commissioners of BC and Canada are investigating a Victoria-based company that performs background checks on tenants and others. The commissioners say they are assessing the company Certain to make sure it complies with personal information laws. The company's website says it performs background checks entirely using online automated checks. Burnaby School District has launched an investigation into what it says was a harmful exam where students were asked to make arguments over whether Jewish people deserve or need a homeland. The question was posed to grade 6 and 7 students during an exam. The district superintendent says regardless of the intention, the question is deeply concerning and could be trauma-inducing for students. And the search for 3 missing mountaineers in Garibaldi Park is on hold until the weather clears. The group was last heard from on Friday. However, bad weather has prevented crews from reaching the area by air or on ground. And now the forecast on the north coast. Rain this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 10. Highs reaching 16 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a few showers and thunderstorms with a high of 14. Highs to 14 with showers in some areas of the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a chance of showers with a high of 17. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, cloudy this afternoon, sunshine in some areas, with strong winds and highs around 16. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Do you have any crow stories?
I can't say I do.
No.
My partner has a couple of crows that she feeds, so she has a few
like the
crow
neighborhood
stories.
Crows?
Yes.
Oh, dear.
I'm not sure how the
doing that.
neighbors are pleased about that. But,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do find people kind of name crows or like just have them, they recognize the crow that's there in the same way, I guess, that they recognize our faces because they're very smart.
And quite loyal, too. I mean, if you feed them constantly. Yes, they're quite loyal.
Is this your experience?
Yes.
I guess they go and kind of shake down each house. Like, if you feed us, we won't bother you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can be feisty.
They can be, yes.
Rob, thanks so much.
Sure.
It's Rob Zimmerman, the CBC Vancouver newsroom, and lots more on the day's top stories on the afternoon shows in your region. Coming up in Metro Vancouver, here's what's on the schedule for On the Coast.
Hi, Michelle. It's Amy Bell sitting in once again on the coast. I'm filling in for Gloria Makarenko. So we've got a great show coming up. Manny Jacinto is absolutely a star. He got his first big break as Jason, the lovable dum-dum on The Good Place, and he's now about to star in a new Star Wars series, The Acolyte. So the Richmond-raised actor is going to join us for a chat about his new show. And recent psychology research out of the University of British Columbia is revealing that one way we can reduce loneliness is by performing daily acts of kindness. So we're going to discuss that study, and it's going to be an amazing show. On the coast, on the air every day, starting at 3.
Amy, thank you very much. I am a fan of Manny Jacinto. I did see The Good Place. He was excellent in that. I know he's Filipino-Canadian from Richmond, so I will be tuned in and a little jealous that you're doing that interview. That's On the Coast coming up this afternoon for our listeners in Metro Vancouver. .34 now, Pacific Time. This is BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. Well, yes, crow nesting season is kind of around now, right? Between spring and summer. And it does seem like a lot of people have a story about getting swooped down on or getting dive bombed by a crow, whether in these recent weeks or in previous years. Today, we're taking your stories of crow encounters as well as your questions about crow behavior, because they really are fascinating creatures as well. There have been movies and poems and songs perhaps about them too. What have you always wanted to know? And have you had a recent crow encounter? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email, our address is bctoday@cbc.ca. I have two guests who know a lot about crows joining me now. Kathy Martin is an ornithologist and a professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at UBC. John Marsleff is a professor of wildlife science at the University of Washington, and he's author of In the Company of Crows and Ravens. Oh, imagine that. Hello and welcome to you both.
Glad to
Thanks,
be
Michelle.
here.
I assume you're both fascinated by crows, but have you been dive bombed, either of you?
Well, I certainly have been during the COVID time when I was out walking around. I found that I offended some crows in Bayswater area near the school there. And so then I had to change my route because I did something that I was unaware of, but they remembered me every time.
And as an expert in crows, was that your conclusion then that you must have done something, you're going to need to change your route?
Well, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in crows. I defer to John,
Sure.
But yes, I think I was probably near a nest or more likely near a fledgling, and therefore the scene is, or possibly a nest because it did happen several days in a row.
Okay. Oh,
But John will have much more spicy stories on crow opinions about his certain clothing and activities.
oh
for
boy.
sure.
What's your spicy story, John?
I don't know how spicy it is, but certainly anybody who studies crows and spends time looking at them, and especially if you go to their nests or try to band them like we do to learn more about them, you make a lot of enemies in the crow world. And we've certainly done that to the extent that we were sure the birds were watching our every move and adjusting where they nested and how they acted when we were around versus not. So yeah, we did do some experiments to confirm that by catching a few birds wearing a particular face mask and then walking around campus with that mask after we had captured birds. And we were in year 16 this year of doing that crazy experiment. and
Why
we still
you do?
get same reaction.
Year 16, you say, what more do you need to learn?
Good question. You know, I mean, they're outliving me at this point. So, yeah, it's. I just kind of wanted to see when they would stop.
Right.
And it looked like this year the response to the masked bad guy was certainly muted. So I'll do one more year to make sure. But otherwise, yeah, I think we're done.
How do you explain that then? What is it about crows that makes them, recognize faces and I guess hold a grudge in some way?
Well, I think the face recognition is because they associate so closely with people that they need to be able to distinguish those that are beneficial to them, that will feed them, like Rob's partner, and those who might shoot them, like a lot of other people, especially in more rural areas, not so much in the city. But certainly there are people that are, fond and not so fond of crows, because they can certainly be a challenge. And for a crow to survive with us so closely and in a city or in a countryside, they need to pay attention. And so that's why they do it, I think. But how they do it and spread this information, it's their social behavior. They are very attuned to what other crows are doing. And if they hear a crow scolding something, not knowing what it might be, they don't run away, but they run to that call and learn at that time about what the potential danger is. So it's self-reinforcing sort of behavior.
That's just why they're so impressive. Kathy, how smart are crows to you?
Well, I would say they're very smart, but many other species are also smart. If you think about birds or animals in general, but birds, if they're cohabiting with humans, it only makes sense if they are evaluating the risk you pose to them.
Right.
So I've spent a lot of time working with grouse, and also there are studies on gulls, and they evaluate the people, and the other animals that are cohabiting. So they kind of look at your intentions. Are you just passing through, or are you intent on sort of focusing on them? So I think, although crows, I think, are at close to the top of the list in terms of intelligence, many other species of birds evaluate the risk. For example, when I worked on grouse, they could tell, the grouse could tell the difference between an eyed dog, which was not allowed to chase them, and a fox or a coyote that was passing by.
Oh,
and
wow.
that just makes sense. It makes sense because why get in a big flap and run and hide and stop what you're doing if it's not really going to be an issue for you? So it's not unusual for them to be watching us.
I love that you said get in a big flap. My guests, Kathy Martin, ornithologist, professor at UBC's Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences, John Marceliff, professor of wildlife science at the University of Washington and author of In the Company of Crows and Ravens. This is really fascinating, thinking about how we coexist essentially with wildlife, how we coexist with birds in general, but crows as in particular. Taking your stories of your own crow encounters and what is something that you've always wanted to know. What is your question about crow behavior? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669. 3733. Lots of calls on the line already. Hi, Alex in Nanaimo.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Quick story about crows. All my life, my father told me my grandmother would come back as a crow. My grandmother died when I was about 5 years old, and years later, I'm in Balleek, Ireland, where she's been buried, standing there with my parents at the grave site in the middle of the week. The church bell rings. And it's a quick 20-minute service to go to Mass. And Dad says to Mom, do you want to go to church? And Mom's like, no, we've got to get going. We've got to get to Dublin for dinner time. There's a squawk, and a single black crow is sitting on the roof of the church.
Oh.
So,
what did you think, and what did you do?
We went to church that day. So something that just lived with me forever.
Oh, wow. And that is, that I think that's something that stays with people, right? It gives them that connection.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
Alex, great story. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle. Have a great day.
You too. Darlene is up next in Nanaimo. In Chilliwack. Hi, Darlene.
Hi, how are you today?
I am fine. And have you had an encounter with a crow lately?
I have. For a few years, I've had a family of crows that would come to my railing, and they would sit beside me on the railing and ruffle their feathers and get all settled in and blink at me and make little chuttering noises in their throats, specifically one that I called Jake. And he would, if I blinked 3 times, he would blink 3 times.
No.
Do they communicate that way, or was he just imitating me?
That's amazing. Okay, so Jake the crow, John, what is the crow doing there? Is it mimicking what Darlene's doing, or somehow making some communication? Or?
It may be mimicking a bit. Crows do blink to indicate their social satisfaction in the setting. If they are very alarmed, they don't blink much. They kind of freeze, eyes open. And if they are in a good situation, they blink a lot. So it may simply be that the bird was, comfortable in that setting, having a early there, and blinking a lot. Matching the actual number possible would take a lot of testing, to vary that and change it around and see if it's a bird really copying what you're doing, or is it just pleased to be there.
Yeah, well, that's pretty promising, Darlene.
Underneath 3 different caps, and it would choose the one that had the treat under it. They're very intelligent, and it brought its young to the railing. 2 crows brought about 4 young to the railing during the storm.
Wow.
It was really interesting.
Oh, that's lovely. You had some company there. You're a fan of crows then?
Oh, total pro crow all the way.
Well, glad to hear it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon.
You too.
Bye.
One in the pro-crow camp. Michelle is up next in Nelson. Hi, Michelle.
Oh, hi, Michelle.
Thanks for calling. What's your story about crows?
Well, I've been wondering about this for a couple of years now. I live on a corner lot, and Kitty Corner is a lot that's no home on it. It's just full of trees. And one day I was out in my yard, and I heard the loudest cacophony of crows. It sounded like 100 crows were over there just screaming. So I happened to walk over there, and as I stood there listening, a fellow walked up the street and stood beside me. And we stood there looking up. We couldn't see a single crow, but we heard them. And all of a sudden, on a dime, they were dead silent, and they all flew out from the epicenter, out away from the middle of this forest of trees, out into the sky.
Oh, wow. What a
It
scene.
was fascinating and intense, and I've often wondered what that was all about.
Oh, that's great. Michelle, thank you from Nelson. Yeah, what does that tell you? What is it about crows that that lead to that behavior, John?
Could be a couple of different things. Most likely it was a predator of some sort in the area, maybe a hawk. And they were like scolding us when we've done something wrong. They were scolding that hawk. Others were learning about the area. And then the scene was over. Maybe the hawk left and the birds left.
Right.
Could have been a dead crow there. That's a common thing also. Maybe, again, a predator killed a crow, or even crows fighting. One killed the other. And all the birds around would have been attracted to that scene, scolding, giving these cawing, really conspicuous vocalizations. And then it's over and they leave. So it's a striking thing to see or to hear, but it's pretty common with crows. That's part of the way they learn about the dangers in their particular environment.
How much do they rely on each other then? How
Quite
important
a lot,
is that?
I think. I mean, I think Kathy could speak to this as well with other birds, but they certainly, a long-lived animal, a social animal like us and like crows, we gain a lot from secondhand knowledge rather than having to experience something challenging or costly to ourselves. We can learn about it and avoid it.
Kathy?
Oh, yes, I agree that the learning from each other, and I think crows do that in spades, even passing it down to other generations.
Yeah, it's Kathy, you might be familiar with this coming from UBC, but I here in Metro Vancouver, we're all familiar with that the travel, the commute, the daily commute by this huge flock of crows heading towards Still Creek and Burnaby. I mean, that is really a spectacle to see, because it just kind of like the sky turns dark and you hear the flapping and perhaps some cawing as well. And I just love it. And then I've seen them roost as well over in that area. And that I don't love as much. It just feels like a little bit more creepy than when they're in flight. It's quite majestic, but and there's a real fascination with it, right? This migration in the evening at dusk time. What do you take from that, Kathy?
Well, I think a lot of sort of corvids roost have a communal roost, and there's various ideas about the value of that, but it probably has multiple values like social learning. And it's not unusual for birds to go to a safer place in the evening, and then sometimes just possibly for warmth. And so, yeah, some of these roosts can be up to 2 million birds, like from several hundred to a couple of million, depending on where. And some of these roosts, particularly ones in Europe, have been in use for over a century in the general area. So, yeah, there's safety in numbers and also the opportunity to learn.
Oh, that is just really, really impressive. Tom is calling us from Gibsons. Hi, Tom.
Oh, hello there.
Hi, do you have a question about crows?
Well, yeah. First of all, there's a major raven-crow dispute going on in my backyard as we speak here. I wish you could hear what's going on back there.
What does it sound like?
Well, it's mostly the crows. You don't hear the ravens too much, but there's probably a raven nearby a nest somewhere, and the crows aren't too happy about it. But anyway, one quick story. A golfer in our local course accidentally killed a crow hit by a golf ball. I guess they call it a worm burner, a low-flying golf ball, and hit it by mistake, of course. And so he went and he grabbed the crow and he took it off the golf course and just kind of laid it on the side of the fairway there. And crows came down and swooped on him. They weren't happy about him messing with this crow. And so 3 or 4 weeks later, he went out to golf again. A couple weeks later, he went to golf again. And as soon as he teed off on the first tee, crows came out of nowhere and started swooping on this guy. And he continued to try to play golf, played a couple of holes, and these crows they seem to remember him, recognize him. I don't know if it's his eyes or how they recognize him, but they just would not leave him alone. He gave up playing. He tried again a week or so later, and the same thing happened. And so he just kind of gave up playing golf at that golf course anymore.
Oh, boy. I mean, that's certainly... distressing, I'm sure, for him. I've heard of people really become afraid of going out. I had a friend once who was almost afraid of going out because it just became such a recurring incident, right? Wow, Tom, thank you for the call. I'm going to ask John. Go ahead.
Just one more question. As far as recognition, do the crows, they seem to recognize certain people. I worked on a boat where a couple of us fed the crows, and they seemed to recognize us right away, the ones that were, of value to them in whatever feeding ways it was. But they seemed to really look at you as if they recognized you from retinal recognition. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I think that's something that John can certainly speak to what extent, and what people can do. John, if someone like his friend who's basically become recognized and targeted, right? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, certainly they do recognize, we know they recognize our faces by looking at them. I don't know what particular aspect of the face is most important. We did vary some things like our clothing, the person wearing a particular face and all of that. So it's not the way you walk, the way you act, the way you talk, the way you dress. It's something about your face which is fairly immutable, right? I mean, it's consistent. The birds see it and they know it.
Yeah.
So whether it's the nose or the brow or the eyes, not sure what component is most important, or if the whole thing is a gestalt that's important.
And
what people...
Pardon me,
go ahead, Michelle.
Well, just what can people do then? Is it changing your route, or what his friend did, which is just stop going for a while, or?
Yeah, I mean, like Kathy, changing your route is the best thing to do if it's feasible. I mean, you can't play that golf course in another way. So Tom's friend there was pretty well stuck with having to go somewhere else, at least for a while.
Can you carry an umbrella perhaps to cover your face?
You can do that. He could wear a mask to hide his face, or some kind of strange hat that might cover more, but that, of course, makes it tough to golf. The one thing for people to be aware of at this time of the year, and if something strange like killing a crow accidentally happens, is don't touch it. Just stay away from it until at least dark, when the birds aren't around, because they will pay attention to that, and then you will be marked for quite a long time in some cases like that. So it's a tough lesson to learn, but as you said, a lot of people learned it, and some are very much afraid to go out or have to change their routines considerably, like the golfer did.
The BC SPCA does have some advice on its website, and it says, what do I do if I see a baby crow on the ground? Many times the young birds are fine to be left alone, it says, but if you spot a young crow in a vulnerable area with an injury, with no adult birds visible in the area, contact your local wildlife rehabilitator for assistance, or call the BC SPCA. So that is the advice there. Give a call to a professional. Let's take one last call here from Jane in Victoria. Hello, Jane.
Oh, hi.
Hi, and have you had a crow experience?
Yes, we were in Tofino in March and outside having a cup of coffee, and there was a crow there that was crying like a baby. Made the sound of a baby, and everybody was taking note of that, talking about how crows are able to pick up on English or to be able to learn to speak. And so this was an interesting one. And then we went later the next day, we went down to Yakulit and we're having another cup of coffee, and there was either the same crow or another crow that sounded like a baby.
Oh my goodness. So sort of mimicking the sound. Wow, Jane, thank you very much. We have an email from Heather who writes, I was attacked by several crows the other day in Port Moody. I assume there was a nest nearby. Thank you so much. I'm going to just wrap up with my guests here because, Kathy, you talked about how, we live among birds and they are, they're trying to survive. And so they're observing what they need to do to be around us. And John, your book is about, how humans have influenced crow culture, how crows have influenced, humans. What is your advice? I just have a couple of minutes, but what's your advice for us to coexist safely and happily with these very, very smart corvids? Kathy?
Well, I think I don't think there's a great need to feed them. They're foraging generalists. And so one thing to do is, and then if you do have the potential for an interaction, just move away relatively quickly. So don't push it. Although sometimes you're ambushed from the back because you don't notice.
Right.
So give it a bit of a break, and that will probably be a good way to resolve things.
Yeah, because it's going to win. So you can get away. And John, what about you? Any a final tip?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, kind of do your own thing and let the birds do their own thing, first off, but also celebrate their success. I mean, there aren't many animals that live well with us. Crows are one, and coyotes are another type of species like this, and they often get a bad rap, but hey, they're doing the best job they can in a very challenging world that we're creating.
That we're encroaching on, yeah. Really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise on this and helping us to appreciate the crows around us. Thank you.
You bet.
You're very welcome. And I think you better end up with a brief message about Canuck the crow, Vancouver's famous crow, most famous crow.
That's right. He was very famous. You're right, actually. Canuck the crow, if people remember Canuck the crow. Lots of photos. See, there's Jake the crow from earlier and Canuck the crow. We are fascinated by them. Kathy Martin and John Marsleff, thanks so much for your time.